cynical here, but I'm going to assume they're honestly committed to good work, and they're just overwhelmed with the sheer number of bills that they're asked to consider. And I think they take advice on bills and vote from a more ideological standpoint than a critical, let me examine each bill and decide what the merits of each bill are, and then I'll decide case by case as I go through. They tend to vote more ideologically than bill by bill. At least that's the case for this one particular bill.
So Dean, and I'll just gonna kind of go through your points here. I'm gonna go to the next slide. So what you're saying is, a lot of this sounds like legislators seeking out really help from the public in educating, because it's just an overwhelming amount to analyze. But I think maybe what you're also touching on is the need of evidence of public interest. So maybe you can, speak to that.
Yeah, well, as best I can.
Yeah.
I've done some reading in the last year, some sort of policy and sociological type reading about how legislators actually vote. And there have been some really interesting ideas, such that some will vote up or down on a bill depending on, or I guess solely based on who is bringing the bill. So, for instance, with Obama's health care plan, there are a lot of people who have advocated this exact plan years before, but because it's Obama bringing the plan, they're going to vote against it. And I think an open space / real estate development bill might be in the same kind of ballpark.
Yeah, but I don't know why it isn't coming through my...
Meaning farmers, meaning people who are interested in the preservation of open land and then the use of agricultural land. If we could be the voices in the ears of the legislators, then I think we could have a real direct impact. And I know that they're getting some very sophisticated, very precise lobbying, and Monsanto springs to mind as having had an entire group of people in Helena for that entire session, making sure that the bills they wanted passed were passed, and they were. Mm-hmm. And I think there's no reason that we, producers in the state, couldn't have the same kind of impact if we could organize ourselves in such a way that we would be the consultants.
Right.
Of course, nobody would pay us, but we would be the consultants to actually give advice that would work in our interest and, I think, the best interest of the entire state.
So, in kind of like in starting that, you emphasize this calling up our legislators and, being persistent. I wonder, maybe I'll move ahead in what you're talking about in this collective sort of message. So, how do you see that coordinated strategy unfolding in Montana?
Well, I don't know that I have I certainly don't have a marketing background, and I don't know that I know what the bumper sticker slogan is, but I do know that if we're going to be effective at this, we're going to have to get much more organized, much more sophisticated, and much more creative in how we approach the policy aspect of what we do as growers. And I think if we could have a statewide network along the lines of what CFAC has started here, which I think is great, if we could build on that and really be talking to each other across the state about what our common interests are, present a common unified message
right.
to the next legislative session. And we could do it in such a way that behind the scenes it's completely organized and orchestrated, but it presents itself to the legislators as being a lot less so that we look like we're just interested farmers, when in reality we have actually sort of a lobbying machine behind us that we've created for ourselves tougher and a lot more sophisticated in speaking up for our own interests.
So, you know, I laid out a few of those thoughts here, but what are your opinions on an effective approach to that messaging? You know, what, as I said, I have a couple of suggestions you had given before about how to frame agriculture, but, you know, how do we message that more effectively?
Well, I think I'll reiterate that, when we talk about agriculture, specifically small-scale or sustainable agriculture, nobody ever takes us seriously. They don't, well, I'll speak for myself, they don't take me seriously, and that may be for a variety of reasons, but partly it's because they don't believe that small-scale agriculture is a viable business. And I think if we can begin to speak in the language of business, of economic development, of income, revenue, job creation, which we all do, which we all have, it can certainly stack up against any commodity scale operation, especially at an acre by acre comparison. I think we could get into that game of being taken seriously as an economic sector in the state, that we'd have some real, actually valid clout, as opposed to, I think we're sort of seen right now as kind of hippy-dippy, save the land, let's all hold hands and play the guitar. And I think our interests are a lot more practical, pragmatic than that, you know? I mean, the future of job growth in this county, I see it certainly, it contains agriculture on a small scale, because there are farms, but there's also processing, there's also value, all sorts of value-added aspects of this. And I think we need to start speaking that language of numbers and economics and future economic development. And then I think we get some attention.
Well, that was a pretty good, I think, synopsis of what you went through and your thoughts. I'd like to, and those were kind of the main points that I thought hit home for what we were trying to accomplish here. So I'd almost like to encourage folks, if they have a specific question for Dean, to, type it out to the group. Dean is going to have to leave the webinar here in a while, so if you have questions now for him, I'd encourage you to go ahead and type those out. And Dean, is there any other kind of parting thoughts you had or suggestions on communication and outreach in general, both the public and our elected officials? Feel free to summarize your feelings on this.
Well, one thing we could always do is we could get Paul or the who's on the call, Peter Brown or Kevin, maybe want to run for office, right? And we could take over the legislature that way. I don't tend to think that's the best use of our time, but I do tend to think that our interests are real and valid and need to be taken into consideration at the state level for a variety of reasons. And I think we have to get more serious about voicing those concerns to the right people, not just to each other. Right? If we had Ted Schweitzer in the office, he's in the governor's office, and we'd be facing a world of hurt right now. He vetoed 70-some-odd bills last year. So we've got some work to do.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, I want to thank you, Dean. If no one has anything specific to ask Dean, he'll be on the line for a little while longer. I think we're gonna move ahead to Paul. Thanks, Dean.
My pleasure.
And let's see here. I'll get Paul on the microphone.
All right. Hope folks can hear me. And just to just to echo some of what Dean said about the passage of House Bill 542, I think he really nailed it in terms of my experience of working on that bill was that a lot of legislators are persuadable. It is worth our time to focus on convincing people that family-scale agriculture is valuable here. It's a core value that we already have. So really hitting that point home with the right message, and the right messenger is really you all. It's farmers, it's people who eat, it's people who care about rural communities and working landscapes. It really goes quite a long way. I think Dean really nailed that. So I'm going to speak a little bit here to the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition's education and outreach on farmland conservation, and really just kind of walk you through how our story and how we've been involved and really evolved and advanced our education and outreach efforts. We started with reviewing subdivisions, then went on to researching some of the trends of the loss of farmland and the dynamic of agriculture in Missoula County. And through that, we then proposed some policy recommendations. And then we realized, wow, we've done a lot of work ourselves here, but we've gotten in front of the community in a lot of ways, and we realized that we needed to back up and engage the rest of the community in order to move forward and be effective with our elected officials locally. And then we've implemented ongoing outreach to individuals in Missoula County, to organizations and businesses, neighborhood councils across the county, and then continuously with government officials and agencies. And through that, we've also then continued to review subdivision proposals and amped up our outreach efforts. With each subdivision is actually an opportunity to educate and reach out to people to remember that this is a problem. We continue to lose farmland here in Missoula County. Next slide. So you've seen this slide before, the path to subdivide. Subdivision starts an element review with the developer and the planning office. It then moves to agency review, and that's kind of the first opportunity the public has to weigh in. But most of the time, this is a step that people miss altogether because they see it at the governing body, at that last arrow there. And that's where we came in. In December 2007, the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition came in and testified in a public hearing on a subdivision, and we actually convinced the Missoula City Council not to annex and approve a subdivision at that point. And it was then that the Office of Planning and Grants in Missoula said, hey, you know, if you guys are going to comment on subdivisions, it would be even better to have you at the agency review level. And so they invited us to come in and be a regular agency to comment on the impacts to agriculture of every subdivision proposed on agricultural land as something that would be better for everyone involved. And so that's what we do now. We write letters, and obviously I'm not asking you to break out your magnifying glass for this, but here's one letter where one of the 30 that we've written on subdivisions now since the beginning of 2008, where what I want you to see is that we're speaking to the facts. On that first page, it's just 5 points regarding the facts of the impacts to agriculture that this subdivision would have. And again, as you remember from the first webinar, that speaks directly to the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act, that every local government in the state of Montana has to consider a subdivision's impacts to agriculture, and if those impacts to agriculture are significantly adverse, then that subdivision can either be denied or conditionally approved to mitigate the impacts to agriculture. And so on the left there, we're just pointing out the facts, and then on page 2, you can see that we make a recommendation. The underlined part based on the significant impact of agriculture, DFAC recommends denial of this subdivision. And so really our goal is not to see each subdivision denied, but to see better subdivisions for agriculture, and that includes nearby working farms and ranches, as well as the farmland itself within that subdivision. So as I mentioned, we've commented now on 30 subdivisions with letters like this, and through that, we've ended up with a lot of questions about the state of agriculture and land use patterns in Missoula County. And so that led us to the next phase of doing some research. What is the state of agriculture in Missoula County? What are the trends in terms of the lots of farmland? So we released this report. We took 9 months to do the research, and we released this report, which is available on our website, called Losing Ground: The Future of Farms and Food in Missoula County. And the main finding we found was that Missoula County has lost 29,000 acres of working farm and ranch lands since 1986. And that's basically, if you count up, this is the Montana Department of Revenue data, if you count up the different classifications of agricultural lands, not including the non-qualified agricultural land, it adds up to 29,000 acres. And that remarkably is quite similar to the non-qualified agricultural land, the increase there in land that is could be agricultural but is no longer taxed as it's no longer used as agricultural land. So that is a 24% reduction in cropland and a 20% reduction in grazing land total in Missoula County in just those 25 some odd years. So that was the main finding, and that's where I mentioned the last time, you can do this in your county, and for us this boils down to 3 football fields of working farm and ranch land every single day in Missoula County since 1986. That's what was lost. And you can do that in your county. That's the main, of the 9 months of research it took to produce Losing Ground, this is really the big take-home message we repeat over and over again. I'll quickly show you some other ones that we think is important for making a case. That the discrepancy between production and consumption. There's only $7.6 million of sales in Missoula County at the farm gate. That's still $7.6 million that's we think is important to our economy, particularly to rural communities. But the same token, Missoula County eaters spend $3 million on food every year. So there's an opportunity right there for us to be buying as much food as we can locally with those direct sales going right back to the farmer and actually increasing the total number of farm sales because the farmer will be capturing more and more value. Another finding, just real quick, was that the average residential lot is growing significantly in Missoula County. In 1970, the average residential lot was a ½ acre in size. That had doubled 34 years later. By 2004, the average residential lot in Missoula County was a whole acre. And in 2008 and 2009, the new residential lots, the ones we were creating, was an average of 2.7 acres. That's what we're building today. So that's a huge trend. Not only are we building on the farmland, but we're using it less and less efficiently for residences. We're using more and more land per person just for residential lots. We also found that within subdivisions on farmland, only 60 acres, and this is the absolute best farmland we saw subdivided in between 2008 and 2009, in those 2 years, that basically 350 acres were converted to residential lots, and only 60 acres were remaining available for agriculture. And mind you, those 60 acres would have been also part of the residential lots had CFAC not been commenting on subdivisions. In the 4 years we've been commenting on subdivisions, we've been able to have 250 acres permanently protected as conditions of approval. So those 60 acres are part of that 250. So this research is basically just to say that we're able to generate a lot of data in this, and from that we produced what we think are some really thoughtful policies to help change these troubling trends. It also made us step back and say, okay, so what? Where are we? We've educated ourselves through doing this research. We presented the research to elected officials, so we were able to educate our government, and we were able to then propose policy recommendations. But what we hadn't done was bring the rest of the community up to speed. And so we realized that we needed to make this information easy to access and easy to comprehend. And so in the next phase here, we've started to try to produce the resources and get out in the community to bring people up to speed to see, wow, first of all, this is a big problem. We're losing farmland. And that's where that 3 football fields every day since 1986 really comes in handy. Helps people get their mind around it. But with that, we also needed to get them to understand our policies. So here we've produced a map of all the subdivisions we've commented on in Missoula County. And you can go to this on our website. You can see that it's just www.missoulacfac.org/subdivisions-map. So you can go find it. And this is an interactive map. You can see the agricultural soils in the red, yellow, and pink. And then the place markers show subdivisions that we've commented on. Now, if you click on one of the place markers, a subdivision itself will come up. And we try to use images as much as possible because we think that really that image is worth more than all the words we can put behind it. You can see here in this subdivision that's actually coming up right now, just last Tuesday, the planning board recommended denial of this subdivision, Riley Acres. It'll go to the county commissioners on April 4th in Missoula County. But that image shows, wow, we're going to build residential lots on all the farmland, and then the one largest lot is actually on the land with 25% or slopes. So it reflects the bigger trend we're seeing in Missoula County is build on farmland, not on the other land. And here, when you go to this map as well, if you were to scroll down on this, you'd be able to download the letter that CFAC wrote outlining the impacts to agriculture and our recommendation, which in this case is denial. All of the red place markers, by the way, are where we've recommended denial. The yellow ones show where we've recommended conditions of approval, and the blue ones show where we actually didn't think the impacts to agriculture were all that significant. So this was one phase, one part of our doing some outreach and helping the problem be easy to comprehend. Third thing we did was go out into the community and try to show broad, diverse support for our policy recommendations. And by the way, I'll get into those policy recommendations in the next webinar. But it's incredibly important to show that the community and the diverse stakeholders in the community really are behind what you're proposing. And so here, we went out, all through presenting to these organizations' boards, we're able to pull together 33 organizations to support this. So here are the food and agriculture groups. You can see everyone from the Farmers Union to the Growers Co-op to businesses like Farm to Family. They're supporting our recommendations, which is really important. And then next, you can see there's all these conservation groups that say, hey, yeah, you know what, we care about farmland too. Montana on there is showing that farmland's important to bird habitat. Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation shows that this is really important farm and ranch land is incredibly important wildlife habitat. Montana conservation voters, etc., Clark Fork Coalition. It's really important for wildlife things because it's important for water quality and hunting access and wildlife habitat. So you can see the diverse support just within the conservation community. And then lastly, you can see that there's actually a lot of developers and realtors that support us because, you know what, this is about our quality of life. There's no reason for us to be building houses on farmland when farmland is so important to our quality of life here. It's so important to building a sustainable community, and really there's no need to be building inefficiently on farmland when we can do so within the city itself and within our towns within the infrastructure that already exists. So frankly, I think this piece is one of the most important things to take home from the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition's outreach, is to show this broad support for our recommendations. And then additionally, we were able to gather signatures. Almost just under 1,400 Missoula County residents signed our petition to support the policies that we recommended, and we presented this to the county commissioners and city council as well. So lastly, I just want to wrap up with some of the messages that I see as what I've seen gain the most traction here. People care about working farms and ranches. It's really very simple. The working part is what I think people find very compelling, as opposed to hobby farms and ranches, which I'm not knocking, but working farms and ranches people really care about. And they get that farmland is an essential part of someone being able to make a living on the land. Our agricultural heritage, our past, being able to take the heritage that we're given, that we inherit, and passing that on as an agricultural legacy that's viable, that resonates with people. People get that. And images of the landscape and people on the landscape really go a long way. Next, people see that this land is producing food, good food for all. That's a very compelling message. And frankly, one of the things I love about farmland conservation and working on this issue is that there's a hook for everybody. If you care about food justice and good nutrition and fresh food, then there's a hook for you. If you care about the working rural communities, there's a hook for you. If you care about wildlife habitat, there's a hook for you. And then lastly, I think this is about a choice. And people, when presented with choice, they really get it. When you look at this aerial photo of a subdivision on the left and rich working farmland on the right, you get it. The land on the left, that soil underneath those houses is just as fertile as the land on the right. And you can see the very clear choice that we have in Missoula County and frankly across Montana. It's a very stark contrast between working communities and one that is permanently never going to support a farm again. You get that choice. So that's really kind of captures the work that CFAC has done. We started with the subdivisions, and we keep using each subdivision as an opportunity to our elected government agencies, and as reach out to the public as a time where they have a voice. But we really had to back up from the subdivisions and the research and the policy to bring everyone up to speed, because the foundation of getting anything done is building that community awareness. And so hopefully we will continue to do that, and because that's the foundation of that work. And I think incredibly important. And I think our next speaker, Kathy, will introduce, but Dan can really speak to that in Ravalli County and how they were able to get their open space bond passed through building community awareness. Oh, okay. What is the question?
Okay, so we have one question, Paul. have you done any consulting with any of the land trusts in regard to conservation easements?
Not too much. You know, one thing that Vermont is doing that I've tried to spread the word about here in Montana. Vermont the Vermont Land Trust has been very active in conserving farmland and through conservation easements. But one of the things that I realized was even after the conservation easement went on the land, it was still unaffordable for farmers. And so what they've done is they created a tool to bridge the gap in affordability to ensure farmers to get it, and then that's called the option to purchase at agricultural value. And so the Vermont Land Trust will no longer place an easement on farmland without also buying from the landowner the option to purchase that land at its agricultural value. It's a really neat tool. Basically, it means that the landowner is able to sell the development rights off the land and then also able to sell that option to purchase it as ag value. And what that means is then when the landowner goes to sell the land trust can come in and say, well, we might want to exercise this option. And so they have the land assessed for its agricultural value. And really they make sure that the land is sold to a farmer at its agricultural value if they have to. And I think out of 14, they've done 14 of these that have now changed hands. Only once have they actually had exercised that value, and then they turn around. So they buy the land at its assessed agricultural value, and they turn around and sell that land to a farmer. That's the only, I've tried to spread that idea, but by and large, I see our land trust doing phenomenal work here, and it's an incredible tool. The conservation easement itself is an incredible tool to have in the toolbox of conserving farmland. I think we really need to go beyond the easement and create bigger plans, more comprehensive plans for working farms and ranches in our communities. And then I think that actually increases the power of easement to be that selective, fine tool to come in and execute the conservation on one particular piece of land within that broader comprehensive plan. So that's kind of the work that CFAC has been doing, and we certainly consider the land trust to be very important partners in that.
Okay, well, I think we'll move along to our last speaker, Dan Halls. And Dan, if you want to say hello, make sure we can hear you. Okay, and so Dan owns a 600-acre dairy farm in Ravalli County. He served on the Ravalli County Planning Board for over 10 years. And he helped develop the county's growth policy as well as the Open Lands Program. He's currently on the Ravalli County Right to Farm and Ranch Board, as well as the Mountain West Cooperative and Teller Wildlife Refuge. So thank you, Dan, and we'll just move along with your presentation.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate that very much. The way we started with the Open Lands Bond, which is what I'm going to primarily talk about today, was we did an ag study assessing the impact of agriculture in the Bitterroot Valley, and that was a collaboration between the Ravalli County Right to Farm and Ranch Board and the Bitterroot Land Trust. It worked out very well. It was a nice partnership. We used Larry Swanton from the Center for the Rocky Mountain West to provide our analysis of the economic and demographic changes that were occurring in the valley, and David Schultz of Schultz and Associates on the effects of the changes of our community's values and beliefs. What Dave did when he did that work was traveled around to the different communities, kind of got with the coffee clutches at the different restaurants and meeting places where folks were informally chatting every day, and went from there. Gathered his information at that juncture. So
That was very valuable information for us and very valuable for the community and the commissioners when they were working on that. The overall project goal was to examine agriculture's changing role in the Bitterroot Valley. Ag in the Bitterroot Valley was tremendous in the early days. It went through the apple boom, of course. It went through the sugar beets were a very big part of that. Then it has evolved into mostly pasture land, hay, and grain growing. A few dairy farms are left, but he looked at all those changes, and we did 3 phases of work during that time. We refined our understanding of the changes in the agricultural climate, and we tried to identify initiatives and tools that would enhance the profitability of the ag land. And then we introduced those tools to the community, the county commissioners, and the area leaders. The sponsors were amazing. The American Bird Conservancy gave us money, the Bitterroot Stock Growers, Caroline Davis, Bird Security Bank, Lakeland Feed and Supply, Mountain West Properties, the Teller Wildlife Rescues, Crown Unlimited, the Tucker Crossing Ranch, the United States Forest Service, Virginia Brown. We had a very wide-ranging outreach, and that support from a broad and very diverse community helped us immensely. The role of the Valley County Right to Farm and Ranch Board on this issue was the impact of ag study that we put together, and then we took the result of that study, used a presentation, we used the Gallatin County model as far as the ag land preservation goes. We had 3 meetings with the public, with the commissioners. We used the Gallatin model to formulate our deal. We had a public campaign. We ran our public campaign once the commissioners decided to put it on the ballot. Then we managed the public campaign as one would has been running for office or any bond issue at that type. We had meetings in every community at least once, some multiple times. We met in Florence, Stevensville, Corvallis, Pinesdale, Hamilton, Darby. We used the organizations that were active in those communities, the Rotary, the Civic Club, the fire department was a real beneficial outreach for us. One wouldn't think of that, but the volunteer fire department folks are definitely influential in the community, and they're very valuable in that regard. We used some local contributions to fund some advertising, our standard posters, flyers, bumper stickers, and raise the visibility of the process. The Open Lands Bond was on the November 7th, 2006 general election, and the measure passed in Ravalli County with over 60% of the vote. Timing is everything. At the same time that we proposed this, Ravalli County was dealing with a few mega subdivisions, proposed 500-lot subdivisions. I think there were 3 of those in the works at that time. The property owners, we that are on the land, have a right to extract our value, and when we need to extract value, and the Open Lands Bond is a tool to allow that to happen. Speaking of timing, the only and the best time to reach out to that landowner is while it's still in the ownership of the original farm family. When they have come to a point where they need to extract some value from that land, that's the time to talk to them about the possibilities of the conservation easement, how that might work, what kind of revenue that they can get from that. The last thing most people that are in agriculture and have grown up in agriculture and have these family farms want to see is their land amassed with houses. can provide those folks with another alternative that will give them the necessary capital for their retirement, for the emergency, for the heart attack or cancer, where the expenses are, and they need cash. We can save some of this valuable farmland. And I think that's tremendously important for us to remember that those landowners have a right and can expect to extract that value from that land that they've stewarded for sometimes multiple generations. That work. You there, Kathy?
Yeah, I'm here. So, yeah, thank you, Dan. Yeah, and I feel bad because I think I might have run through some of the information here. So I was trying to keep up with you, but I just wanted to reiterate to folks, you know, the different phases here, because I kind of breezed through the slides to stay with Dan, but just so everybody knows, you know, I'm just kind of going back through the sponsors that Dan talked about that were on board with everybody, that it started with 3 phases of work, and that there were really two audiences that this was geared towards, the county commissioners and also to the public campaign. So just kind of in summarizing that process there and the different approaches based on that audience.
I apologize to everybody for going past. We are unable to connect, and so Cassie and I are trying to do this over speakerphone and on 2 separate computers that aren't tied together. So very challenging.
But that's you know, what a great success story, and I guess I wonder if folks have any questions for Dan that they would like to pose, given this process. Or have any comments or just to share. I'll let you think for a couple minutes and type out any thoughts you have, and just give you a reminder that our final webinar is going to be 2 weeks from now, and at the same time, Wednesday, April 11th, from noon to 1. And at that webinar, we're going to be focusing on examples of local policies across the state that focus on planning for working farms and ranches. So as we did with this last webinar, I encourage folks that have stories or examples in their own communities to please get in touch with me, and we can talk about having you present or share with the rest of the network at the next webinar. And let's see. I do have one question that came through here, Dan and everyone. What was the primary source of funding for the purchase of the farmland?
Well, the primary source of funding is the $10 million open lands bond, and that is not a purchase of the farmland. When they put their farm into a conservation easement, they retain ownership, but they get a cash amount in addition to the reimbursement for all of the expenses incurred in establishing the easement. We are also partnering with the federal program, and the last several, I think 3 easements that were placed in the valley got a substantial amount of money from the Ag Land Preservation Program at the federal level. And so that partnership is very important when it comes to the funding.
Okay. Well,
I believe that we've done, in Rebellion County, I believe that we've done 6 different conservation easements to date. I'm not exactly sure what the acreage is, but I think it's well over 1,000. And some of the acreage are adjoining, and so we're preserving large blocks. When ground are more willing to go. So getting the first one off the ground in the neighborhood is often the most challenging, and but success always breeds success.
Well, that's really great. I don't see any other questions from the group. But what an amazing process, and I'm really glad that you shared that with us, Dan. Maybe folks can get some hope out of a successful example in Ravalli County. And as no one has any further questions, I guess we'll end our second webinar. Thank you again, Dan and Dean, if you're still on, and everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Cassie.
All right. Take care.